Everybody knows nothing can stop the Juggernaut. Well, how about the hero with the biggest heart? Not medically, spiritually speaking. The Juggernaut is one of the X-Men's oldest adversaries, first appearing in issue 12 back in 1965, only 3 years after the Wallcrawler made his debut. In his first dozen or so appearances, he not only tangled with the Children of the Atom, but also went up against the likes of Doctor Strange and the Hulk, before finally finding himself in the Spider's Web in issue 37 of Spider-Woman. Come on, you didn't think I'd get straight into the main storyline, did you? Spider-Woman was the latest character that the House of Ideas tried to push so that they could have their own female A-lister, their own Wonder Woman. That initiative started in the early 70s when, in an effort to appeal to more female readers, a triumvirate of titles was released, all with women in the lead role. If Night Nurse was lacking in superheroic chops, then Shanna the She-Devil and The Cat, later to become Tigra, more than made up for it, with all three receiving their debuts in August of 72. None of those titles made it past issue 5. More successful was Ms. Marvel. Carol Danvers first appeared in issue 13 of Marvel Superheroes at the end of 1967, before being caught in an explosion in issue 18 of Captain Marvel, which would ultimately give her her own version of Marvel's powers, which led to her getting her own series in 1976, which ran for 23 issues before being cancelled right in the middle of a storyline. So Ms. Marvel hadn't been the marketing success that Marvel were hoping for. Time to try again, this time with Spider-Woman. Initially, she had only been intended as a character in a one-off story, a story written as insurance to protect the character's name. Marvel had heard rumours that animation company Filmation were planning to produce a cartoon featuring someone called Spider-Woman, who, in the initial designs at least, wore a red and blue costume. Of course, they couldn't allow this, but there was nothing stopping Filmation as long as no other company was using the Spider-Woman name. Quicker than you can say Wonder Man, writer Archie Goodwin whipped up an origin story for the character that made her debut in issue 32 of Marvel Spotlight. As for Filmation, they didn't entirely give up on their arachnid character, changing her name and look and introducing her to the world as Web Woman.
The world, small creatures of the cosmos, lend me your powers now! Let's go, Spinner. We've got a fly to catch.
I said that Marvel pushed Spider-Woman, and boy did they push her. Apart from her own series, there were the guest appearances in other titles, appearances in promotional comics, something usually reserved for Marvel's most popular characters, and, of course, a cartoon series. A cartoon series, no less.
For Web of Justice, it's Spider-Woman.
This particular issue was the first written by Chris Claremont, who would stay on the title for roughly a year. The artist had been on the book a little while longer, as Steve Leiloa had been drawing the Dark Angel since issue 25. Sorry Marvel, but Nick Fury ain't going to sell anything to me. He always seems such an old-fashioned character. The fella in the shadows though, now he does look interesting. We're with Nick Fury on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. He's making his way back to his office, but as he enters it, he realises he's not alone. He has an uninvited guest. His well-trained instincts kick in, but he needn't worry, because his guest is none other than Spider-Woman. Although he is surprised to see her there, and even more shocked that someone could so easily circumvent S.H.I.E.L.D's defences, it's okay. They have met before, so he knows that she's one of the good guys. She's actually there to ask him a favour, a massive favour, on trust. Spider-Woman, in her civilian guise of Jessica Drew, wants to set herself up as a private investigator. To do that, she needs a licence, and to get a licence, she needs a reference from someone in a position of authority. That is why she's there speaking to Nick. So why is this on trust? Well, because Nick Fury doesn't know Spider-Woman's civilian identity. She wants him to write the reference and just leave the name blank and she'll add it in later. Nick points out that he could easily find out her identity if he wanted to, but she says she trusts him not to even try. And she's right. So he writes her out a recommendation on very grand, shield-headed notepaper. And he says that actually he's glad that she's leaving behind her previous incarnation as a bounty hunter, because he didn't feel that she was right for that job. She responds, "Why is that? Because I'm a woman?" A suggestion that he roundly slaps down, saying, "Don't be ridiculous. A bounty hunter needs to be hard, ruthless, cruel, as vicious as the creeps that they hunt. And that's not her." And then we get a recap of Spider-Woman's origin. Now this can often be annoying, a bit of a page filler, but actually I'm not that familiar with Spider-Woman's background. So finding out that she was raised from childhood by the High Evolutionary until she was shunned by his new men and then, abhorring the loneliness that she felt, left Wundagore to live in a local village where she accidentally killed her love with her newly manifesting powers, prompting the villagers to pronounce her a witch, but being saved from them by a man called Count Otto Vermis, who worked, surprise surprise, for Hydra, and as such convinced her to also join them, where she learnt not only new physical skills but also how to control her venom blasts, and was then tasked by them to assassinate Nick Fury, but that was when she realised how truly evil Hydra was and so became one of the good guys, is actually quite interesting. After leaving Nick, she flies past the San Francisco Mint, little realising that down below her, in a passing streetcar, are some very unwelcome tourists. Apparently the San Fran Mint contains the country's entire store of vibranium. Now that is going to be picked up tomorrow by Nick Fury. However, by the time he gets there, it'll be gone, courtesy of those tourists, who are better known to us as the Juggernaut, Black Tom Cassidy, and Tom's niece, both of whom, of course, are Irish, which unfortunately means we're going to be subjected to some Irish in this issue. Please don't let them say begorra. Now this was the first issue of Chris Claremont's stint on the title, so if we're going to have some guest stars, who do you think it's going to be? Shall we head to Westchester? The supercomputer Cerebro has detected a mutant in San Francisco with considerable power. Professor X, in line with his vocation, believes that that mutant needs to be contacted and offered the opportunity of joining the X-Men's fold. The X-Men themselves are cleaning up the mansion after Kitty Pryde's awesome battle with not a xenomorph in issue 143 of the Uncanny X-Men, which is an issue that I've reviewed before as part of my Christmas series of reviews, so if you want to check that out, there isn't a link on the screen, is there? That is because I've retired it. It's too late. You should have watched it at Christmas. Back in the city by the bay, Jessica Drew and her flatmate are having an impromptu housewarming party. With Claremont coming on board as the new regular writer, he changed a few things about Jessica Drew's status quo. For a start, he changed her from bounty hunter to private investigator. There's that link with the X-Men, and now he brings in a new romantic interest for her. His name is David Ishima. He lives on the ground floor of their building, and actually, he's their landlord. It's just as she and David are beginning to get a bit intimate when Jessica is hit by a sonic scream, something that David actually can't even hear. She gives him some bump about she has exceptionally acute hearing and could he go and get her a glass of water. And of course, as soon as he leaves to get her that glass of water, she leaves the scene because she needs to investigate the source of that scream. A scream that apparently still isn't stopping. And what a scream it is. Dogs across the city are howling, and burglar alarms also have been set off by it, resulting in the full fleet of police cars crisscrossing the city to see which of those alarms are actually genuine. This means that there are no officers available to keep an eye on the Mint. The Mint, which it is now clear to Spider-Woman, is the source of that scream. Investigating, she finds a literal hole in the wall and then crosses paths with Black Tom Cassidy. Not that Black Tom is aware of it until it's too late. A quick nerve pinch from Spider-Woman keeps him quiet, whilst she discovers even more signs that all is not well at the Mint. Employees are unconscious, loose notes are fluttering around in the air, and tracing the source of that scream, Spider-Woman finds Tom's niece. She is known as Siren. She is dressed in a costume extremely similar to Banshee's, and she's using her sonic scream to try to break through the vault's door. The link with Banshee is a strong one, because Siren is actually his surprise daughter. This is her debut, and boy, can she do some tricks with those powers of hers. Not only can she use it as a means of attack, but when Spider-Woman tries to take her out with a venom blast, Siren protects herself with a bubble of sound. Not only that, but when Spider-Woman launches a missile in her direction, Siren holds it in the air using the power of sound. Now, I don't know how that works, but it's all part of Spider-Woman's plan. Because whilst Siren is focusing her powers on that, Spider-Woman is able to hit her with a venom blast. So that's 2 villains down. This doesn't seem to be too difficult. Oh. Apparently that wasn't even a punch, it was just a slap. But it's enough to send our heroine flying. And she says it still nearly pulverised her. She does her best to make like a spider and leave, but Juggernaut ain't having none of it. He pulls down the wall as she's climbing up it, and then, with one further hit, knocks her out cold. By the time she wakes up, the baddies have gone, the vibranium has gone, but the cops have arrived. Issue 38 and the X-Men have arrived. This is during that weird period where the Angel was hanging out with the otherwise all-new, all-different team. But they're not here just yet. Instead, we see the aftermath of the last issue as Spider-Woman is led off in handcuffs. Of course, she is the prime suspect for the theft of the vibranium, but she's in no mood to help the police with their inquiries. Instead, she's going to carry out her own investigation. As she flies off, some of the officers are going to shoot her out of the sky, but they are stopped by their colleague who reminds them of the rules. If they miss Spider-Woman, the spent shells could land and hit innocent civilians when they fall back to Earth. What? They've actually got rules about shooting people in the sky. So Spider-Woman is now a fugitive, but Jessica Drew has a party to get back to. A party that, incredibly, is still going. At least Lindsay, her flatmate, says that she's been worried about where Jessica was all this time. Jessica has the usual superhero's talent for making up stories covering their absence. In her case, she went for a walk to ease her headache and got lost. Even David is still there, with a lukewarm glass of water, I assume. At that point, the doorbell goes and even more party guests arrive. Although it isn't clear who invited them. One is a billionaire playboy who isn't Tony Stark. One, an African woman. And the third is a tall Russian lad. Ororo asks Jessica, who she's never met before, if they can have a private chat. Jessica, being a bit wary of these strangers, asks what it's about, and Ororo just comes straight out with it. They want to know what she was doing 40 minutes ago as Spider-Woman. Naturally, this is enough to convince Jessica to go and take that chat somewhere private. The trio of mutants explain to Jessica that they know her secret and they found her because Cerebro picked up on her mutant signature. But she explains to them that she wasn't the only person who was at the Mint, so maybe that mutant signature wasn't hers after all. Siren is a new name to the X-Men, but they know Black Tom and Juggernaut well, and they know they're going to need reinforcements if they're going to take them on. However, Jessica says there just isn't time for that. They need to be stopped before that vibranium leaves the country so that she can prove her innocence. Okay, so it's just going to be the 4 of them. And thanks to a mini portable version of Cerebro, it's no difficult task to track down their foes. Dawn the next morning finds the X-Men and Spider-Woman approaching a ship within which we find our villains. But their arrival does not go exactly to plan. You see, the plan was that Storm would carry Peter in his fleshy form and drop him onto the ship. But of course, he would change into his organo-steel form before landing. But as we see Black Tom thinking that they've been hit by some kind of missile, it's clear that a speeding lump of organic steel, when it hits the deck of a ship, will just carry on going, right through to the riverbed. Okay, so not ideal, but it does give us an added element of drama as the ship is now sinking. Initially, our villains have no idea who they're under attack from, but when the Juggernaut is hit by a bolt of lightning, that is clue enough for Black Tom to guess their assailants. He is going to make sure that the vibranium is safe, and he sends his two colleagues off to deal with their enemies. The first clash isn't long in coming, as Spider-Woman swoops on Siren, but her attack is foiled as Siren paralyses her with her sonic scream. Those screams can do anything, can't they? Siren takes the pair of them skyward and then drops Spider-Woman, who, still being paralysed, can't glide to safety. But it's okay, because she literally has a guardian angel looking out for her. Although he is soon distracted as Siren conjures up a sound hologram. What? And then she seems to take control of Warren's mind with her powers. She uses vibration harmonics to manipulate the chemical balance of Angel's brain. A sonic hypnosis. So now, on her orders, Angel drops Spider-Woman again. But with Siren focusing her powers on Angel, they loosen their grip on Spider-Woman. So her paralysis fades and she is able to save herself just in time. By now, Colossus is hauling himself up the ship's anchor's chain. But his ascent is interrupted by the Juggernaut. Yes. They have a brief scrap in which Juggernaut points out that he is by far the strongest, and Colossus doesn't disagree, but he does point out that he isn't the same person that the Juggernaut defeated the last time they met. Since then, he has learned not just to fight with his brawn, but also his brain, and he sends Juggernaut overboard, saying his weight will pull him down like a stone. Wait a minute. That's like the opposite of what we were told in Amazing Adventures issue 16, where we were told that despite his size, the Juggernaut's powers would stop him from sinking. Consistency, guys, consistency! The mind-controlled Angel now turns on Storm, but Black Tom knows that the winged mutant is no match for the Weather Witch. So he uses his mutant powers via his shillelagh, yes, that is how that's pronounced. Irish spellings are weird. To tip the battle back in the baddie's favour. He actually misses Storm, but the debris and shrapnel created by his blast does knock her down. But still in her half-dazed state, she manages a counter-attack of a mini-hurricane against Warren and Black Tom. And if you're worried that that's not enough to keep Black Tom down, you needn't be, because Colossus has now arrived on the top deck. Black Tom says that his bioblasts can wreck a tank, but Colossus points out that he is no tank. Have you lost track of what's happened to Siren? I have. She's still conscious and looking for Spider-Woman. In fact, she's found her. At least she thinks she has, as she uses a sonic blast to tear the hero in two. In two? Yeah, that wasn't Spider-Woman. That was just her costume, stuffed with packing material. But what about her hair? Where did that come from? A quick venom blast from a naked Jessica Drew finally knocks Siren unconscious. Before quickly donning her costume, she meets up with the X-Men. But don't worry, it ain't over yet, and the X-Men know that. They still have to deal with Juggernaut. But how? Jessica Drew hatches a plan. Colossus wraps a length of steel cable between two masts. Then he will act as bait to lure the Juggernaut onto that steel cable, at which point Storm and Spider-Woman will both use their powers to send an electrical charge through the cable, providing enough of a shock to knock out Juggernaut. That's the plan anyway, but as Juggernaut makes his appearance and sees Colossus standing alone on the deck, he makes a good point. He says the two of them are a lot alike. They're both big and strong, and they talk slow. But neither of them is stupid. Colossus facing Juggernaut alone is stupid. He smells a trap. So Colossus has to goad him into engaging with him, which he does after showing off his incredible strength. He really is strong, isn't he? But yes, he grabs a hold of the Russian mutant, who quickly transforms into his smaller organic self, allowing him to slip out of the Juggernaut's clutches. Angel then grabs him and takes him to safety, whilst the women do their bit. One end of the cable is charged by Spider-Woman's venom blasts, whilst Storm provides an opposing massive electrical charge. Juggernaut is stuck in the middle. Juggernaut screams, but not in pain, with rage. Both heroines are ploughing as much of their power into this attack as they can, and it still isn't stopping him. But it seems that something flammable, something explosive was nearby. And soon enough, a massive explosion rocks the ship. Luckily, all of our heroes were able to clear the ship just before the explosion took hold. But the Juggernaut is gone. Black Tom is then delivered to the authorities, and actually, rather helpfully, he confesses everything, admitting it was him and Juggernaut who stole the vibranium. Spider-Woman, he says, had nothing to do with it. And neither, he says, did Siren. Indeed, he leaves her in the care of Storm, knowing that she'll be cared for at the X-Men's mansion. And we end with Jessica setting up her new office and beginning the new chapter in her life as a private investigator. Wow. Spider-Woman defeating Juggernaut, even with the help of the X-Men, is pretty impressive. Almost as impressive as that time she faced down Dr. Doom and lived to tell the tale, although she was helped in that by the plastic surgeon guy. Don't ask. Just don't ask. Jessica Drew has a new life to look forward to, and the Juggernaut, I don't think we need to worry about him for a while. I tell you what, let's travel back in time, just a few months to the summer of 1980, when we met another arachnid-based character for the very first time. This time it was Madame Webb, who made her debut in issue 210 of The Amazing Spider-Man. And that's a pretty cool cover, isn't it? This wasn't a particularly memorable stage in Spidey's history. Issue 200 had seen the return of the Burglar, but otherwise it was really just a procession of villains of the month, although we did have appearances from the Punisher and the Black Cat. In terms of the creative team, there hadn't been a lot of stability, but Denny O'Neil had recently taken over regular writing duties, and this very issue saw the beginning of a new artistic pairing, that being inker Joe Sinnott, along with the son of a legendary Spider-Man artist who would himself gain legendary Spider-Man artist status, John Romita Jr. That writer-artist pairing sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it? Let's see if the results matched the promise. Oh, and if you're wondering why we're even looking at this issue, all will become clear. Something foul is afoot in the offices of New York newspaper The Globe. Rupert Dockery, a man who first appeared in Spider-Woman, working for the LA Courier, is now circulation manager at The Globe, and he is decidedly up to no good. This issue came out during that interesting period when Peter Parker wasn't actually working for the Daily Bugle. Instead, he was working for The Globe. Also, his girlfriend at this point was Deb Whitman, a girl who became convinced that Peter was Spider-Man. Speaking of Deb, she and Pete are in Chinatown, as Deb is making her way to a fortune teller. Sorry, not a fortune teller, a psychic. In fact, a teacher of paranormal phenomena. And her name is Madame Webb. And as much as Deb has faith in this woman's ability, Pete sees her as just another fraud. As Deb continues on to her appointment, Peter has his own that he is late for at the offices of the Globe. His lateness isn't helped by the fact that when he arrives at the office building, the elevators aren't working. Apparently, word has come down from on high that nobody is to go to the editorial department before 5 o'clock, and that is why the elevators have been shut down. Pete, already late for his meeting, has his own solution to that, one which necessitates a change of clothing. So what's happening in editorial that is so darned important anyway? It is a rare visit from the newspaper's publisher, Ms. K.J. Clayton. She is there to tell the senior leadership of the newspaper that she is handing over the Globe to Rupert Dockery. That seems like a pretty easy thing to do. However, just as she is handing it over, the meeting is interrupted by a group of less than friendly looking people. Now, as we know, these are the people that Dockery was speaking to back on page 1. So he's in on it, which means that this whole job, whatever it's about, should go pretty smoothly. And before you know it, Ms. Clayton is seized by one of the gang members. Why do I get the feeling we're about to get another broken window? And indeed, another uninvited guest arrives at the meeting, but this one is one of the good guys. Then we get some great Matrix-level reactions from Spidey as a really great sequence begins, where we get a classic Spider-Man setup, where he is outnumbered, but definitely not outgunned. Plus, of course, plenty of witty banter, although it is just one way as the gang go to work silently. As some of the gang members escape with Ms. Clayton, Rupert Dockery does his best to pretend that he wants Spider-Man's help, whilst also subtly, accidentally getting in the web swinger's way. That was enough to slow him down, because by the time he gets to the lift, they've gone. But they do seem to have left behind a clue. And looking at that clue, Spider-Man realises what a small world it is. Luckily, the clue bears Madame Webb's address, so he decides to take the direct approach, pay her a visit, and surprise her. But the surprise is on him, because being a genuine psychic, she saw his visit coming. And there, before him, sat on a state-of-the-art, high-tech life support system, is Madame Webb, with a top-quality description at the top of the page. A low, almost inaudible hum of machinery, a smell of ozone and disinfectant and age, and a voice that crackles like ancient parchment. That life support system was designed by her late husband, and if she was to be separated from it, she would die within a minute. She is also blind, physically blind, but her psychic gifts give her vision far beyond any of ours. Spider-Man, however, is unimpressed. When asking her how reliable is her second sight, she replies that she can guarantee nothing. Paranormal abilities are subject to many outside influences, an answer that he sees as a typical cop-out from a charlatan. Nonetheless, he gives her the flyer that was dropped at the Globe and asks if she can tell him anything about it. She can. Reading the aura of the leaflet, she can feel that it belonged to one of her students, Belinda Bell, someone who is a model and, more pertinently, an actress. Belinda had handled that flyer in a moment of danger, great peril. Peril, indeed, that was caused by Belinda herself, because she has cooperated in deceit, in a lie, one that involved a second woman by the name of Katrinka Janice Clayton. Because that wasn't KJ Clayton in the offices of the Globe earlier. That was indeed Belinda pretending to be the Globe's reclusive owner, just as Rupert Dockery intended. But now Belinda herself is in danger. But where is she? Again, Madame Webb reaches out with her power and says that she can picture trains, piled up as though in an accident. And although she can't be more specific, it seems that's enough for Spidey to have a full 180. And now, for reasons that even he doesn't know, he believes in her. Meanwhile, at Hickory Dockery Toys, we catch up with the gang and the fake Mrs. Clayton, who is at this moment tied up. She doesn't understand why this is. After all, they are all on the same side. But she is told by one of the gang members that his orders are to keep her there until he gets word from the guy who's bankrolling the operation. It seems to me that a woman's life is at risk. Maybe two. Because at a penthouse suite at the offices of the Globe, Rupert Dockery is breaking some very bad news to the real KJ Clayton. The worst kind of news. She is a recluse, so as far as the board members of the paper are concerned, the woman that they saw earlier is the real deal. They saw that woman hand over control of the newspaper to Dockery, and then later on tonight, that woman will be found dead. A fate that also awaits the genuine Ms. Clayton. He tells her it's pointless trying to run. All the doors are locked, the elevators without power. Plus, no one is nearby to hear her cry for help. I think the phrase you're looking for is, "Nothing can stop me now." Back at the toy shop, the gang receive a phone call from Dockery. It seems Belinda's time on this earth is coming to an end. Not, however, before another window is destroyed. As Spidey once again sets about the gang, he says, "Aren't you going to ask me how I found you?" "I was wondering." He explains about Madame Webb's vision of the piled up trains. Says that once he checked out Penn Station and Grand Central, he realised that those trains didn't have to actually be the real deal. Then, once he discovered that Dockery owned his own toy shop, selling toy trains, his next move was obvious. By the time he's finished explaining that, there are only two gang members left to worry about. He doesn't worry about them for long. Then, as he begins to gloat over Belinda, she says, "Don't worry about me, because the real Miss Clayton is about to face death herself." Web swinging across New York, Spidey finds Clayton's penthouse suite engulfed in smoke and flame. We get another smashed window. "Backdraft, Spidey, backdraft!" before he then homages the cover of Amazing Fantasy 15. But his work isn't over yet, because Dockery is escaping. Well, barely. He just manages to get into his car before Spidey flips it over, naturally breaking a few windows in the process. Dragging Dockery from the wreckage, the failed newspaper magnate says he will speak to the authorities. He will confess all. So that all went well, initially at least, because after all the trauma that she was subjected to, KJ Clayton has decided to retire the Globe. The newspaper has suspended publication, and Peter is without a job. The old Parker luck. Then the phone rings, and it's Madame Webb. And no, he didn't give her his number. She congratulates him on his success, or rather, Spider-Man's success. She says, don't worry, she will keep his identity a secret, but she has some good news for him. His fortunes are about to change, because at that moment in time, someone is talking about him. Someone who is going to give him a job. Well, that's just got to be good news, hasn't it? So there you have it, Madame Webb's debut in a really well-written, really well-drawn issue, with Spider-Man taking on typical street-level villains. Yeah, that's not going to last. And indeed, following issues featured the likes of the Submariner, the Frightful Four, the debut of Hydro Man in that storyline where he and the Sandman merged, and many more besides. But arguably, none of them matched what was coming. A classic X-Men villain, an unstoppable force. The Juggernaut. It had been exactly a year since Kane Marco was last seen in that Spider-Woman story, going missing at sea. Denny O'Neil had long since moved on, and after another short period of rotating writers, Roger Stern had taken over as the regular scribe, and, as usual for him, was doing a fine job. John Romita Jr. was still drawing Spidey, although now it was Jim Mooney providing the ink. There really isn't much more to say, is there? So let's join the Juggernaut and Spider-Man for their date with destiny. Madame Webb is having a very bad dream. In it, she's being stalked by the Dark One, a powerful, malevolent being who seems to be unstoppable. However, there is someone trying to stop the Dark One. He is nowhere near as strong, but his courage, his will, and his heart almost make up for that. Almost. And then, just as the Dark One looms over Madame Webb, just as he is about to end her life, she wakes. Being Madame Webb means that that dream was more than a dream. It was a vision of the future. The events that happened in it aren't certain to happen, but what she is certain about is that there is only one person who can save her. In his Chelsea apartment, Peter Parker is roused from sleep by the ringing of his phone. He wonders who it could be, speculates that it could be an old enemy of his, calling to tell him that he knows his secret identity. He's going to wish that's all it was. On the end of the line, of course, is Madame Webb. She tells him of her vision, that someone is going to threaten her life within the next 24 hours. She has no further details than that. She doesn't know who it is or exactly when it will be. But when she does, she'll let him know. Out in New York Harbour is a yacht captained by Black Tom Cassidy. At that moment in time, he is considering whether or not to recruit a new member into his schemes, one who will practically guarantee him success in the future. While he's mulling this over, his friend Kane Marco, aka the Juggernaut, bursts through the doorframe and tells him that he's bored. Tom tells him of his plan to recruit a new ally, someone who will help them defeat the X-Men the next time they cross paths. Yes, it's psychic and predictor of the future, Madame Webb. Her foresight, added to their power, will make them nigh on unstoppable. Juggernaut quite likes the plan, but more importantly, it will give him something to do, give him a real workout. So he agrees he will go and get her. Tom says, OK, we will put the boat into dock, but Juggernaut says, don't worry about that, I'll walk. And jumping overboard, he does just that. As he makes his way through the water, Madame Webb gets a new vision. She sees that the Dark One will come from the sea. She must alert Spider-Man. With the Globe now shut down, Peter Parker is back working at the Daily Bugle. It's whilst he's there, touting for any new assignment, that Glory Grant's phone rings, and, somewhat surprisingly, it's for him. The message is brief, as Madame Webb states, he'll be coming out of the sea at Battery Park. You must stop him. What a great setup. And of course, at this moment in time, neither Madame Webb nor Peter Parker know who the Dark One actually is. He speculates that it could be the Submariner, says that he is one tough customer. Yeah, true. But it was only recently that he showed that even against the Prince of Atlantis, you're no pushover. Juggernaut has now emerged from the sea. In our last review, we saw Spider-Man overturn a car. Here we see Juggernaut do it, with a lot more ease. So Spider-Man missed Juggernaut's emergence at Battery Park, but that's okay, because a trail of destruction through Manhattan leads him to his foe. A foe that he has never encountered before, and as such, he doesn't know the extent of Juggernaut's powers. Now, characters' power sets can vary depending on the whim of the writer. You may think that being a Spider-Man book, that Roger Stern will downgrade Juggernaut's powers a little bit, just to give Spider-Man some kind of hope against him. Not a chance. It's clear to Spidey that this guy is going to be strong. So he takes no chances and launches a full-force, sneaky attack and bounces right off of him, the Juggernaut not even flinching. OK, so let's just web him up with the trusty old web shooters. But Juggernaut's constant protective force field means the webs don't even touch him. Fine, they don't have to touch him, because a web across the street will just stop him. At least, it should stop him. And in fact, the webbing holds, but the buildings it's attached to, no, afraid not. And soon enough, the Juggernaut emerges from the webbing to continue on his way. I guess it's true, nothing can stop him. So far, I don't think he's even noticed that he's being attacked. And look at this Brilliant image of Spider-Man's efforts to bring Jugs down. Juggernaut tells him to give up. He can't possibly stop him. And Spidey says, "Give up? Us Spider-Men don't know the meaning of the words." This is also true. So he's not stopping Juggernaut, not even slowing him down really, but he is irritating him. So Juggernaut decides to brush him off by walking through the nearest building, emerging sans Spider-Man and saying in a brilliantly understated way, "Blasted nuisance." Spider-Man is trying to recover inside that building, well, inside the wreckage of the building. Some of the people that work there are also injured, but at least one of them isn't, and he answers the phone when it rings, saying, somewhat surprised, "Spider-Man, it's for you." Spidey doesn't have to be psychic to know that it's Madame Webb on the end of the line. It's not really much of a phone call either. She just says to him that she's perceived a word in connection with their enemy, and she asks if the word Chitarak, or however you pronounce it, means anything to him. Bizarrely, for someone who's never heard of the Juggernaut, he thinks it does. But then he moves on to the fact that Juggernaut is just too much for him. He needs help. The Fantastic Four, the Avengers, somebody. A tenor says they're out of town. Someone else who could help Spider-Man is Doctor Strange, because Spidey reckons it's him who he has heard use the word Chitarak. And what a surprise. Heading over to Greenwich Village, Spidey discovers that Doctor Strange is out of town. Even he's getting sick of this trope, as he says, "Not again. This trick never works." Mind you, it's not an entirely wasted journey, as Wong tells Spider-Man that he has heard of Juggernaut and he's heard that he is unstoppable. He also suggests that Spider-Man contacts the X-Men, which sounds like a good idea to me. At that point the phone rings, and as Wong goes to answer it, Spidey says, "Don't bother, it's gonna be for me," and indeed it is. Madame Webb tells him that she has already sensed the X-Men's connection to Juggernaut, but they are beyond reach, as are the Fantastic Four, and as are the Avengers. There is no one who can help him, and he knows that he can't stop the Juggernaut alone, but he's going to try all the same. What a guy. Once again, it's quite easy for Spider-Man to track down the Juggernaut. In his absence, the police have stepped in and attempt to stop the villain. Even the heavily armed Special Weapons Task Force attempt to stop him, and fail. Strolling past them, the Juggernaut finally arrives at where Madame Webb lives and effortlessly pushes his way through the front door. But how irritating. There's a giant web blocking the stairway, but it doesn't block it for long. I love Juggernaut's attitude in this story. He knows how powerful he is, and as a result, he never gets angry or flustered. He never even raises his voice. Like here, after pushing his way past Spider-Man's web, all he thinks is, "I'm getting tired of this. If that little web-faced idiot gets in my way again, I'll hand him his head." Spidey is now in Madame Webb's apartment. His latest plan is again to cast a web across the door, but this time link it up to one of the generators in the room. Then he will boost the voltage so that it's strong enough to knock out a herd of rhinos. Indeed, as Juggernaut pushes his way through the door, we are told that he is hit with the equivalent power of 1,000,000 volts. But again, it fails. Indeed, Juggernaut says to Spider-Man that he's been wasting his time all morning and he hasn't even given him a decent workout. Have a heart, Jugs. Then, as the two commence battle once more, Madame Webb realises that this is all very familiar. The dream she had, the vision, is becoming reality. Spider-Man knows he can't go toe-to-toe with Juggernaut, so instead he tries to lure him away from Madame Webb. And again, fails. With Spider-Man down, there is now nothing stopping Juggernaut from taking Madame Webb. And indeed he does, lifting her up from her life support system. Spider-Man points out Juggernaut's error, that Madame Webb cannot be separated from her chair without dying. Juggernaut realises that makes her pretty useless to him and Black Tom, so he drops her on the spot and leaves. Spider-Man then shows another way of being heroic by keeping Madame Webb alive via mouth to mouth. Luckily for him, the police and an ambulance aren't far away, and as Madame Webb is taken to intensive care, he is left with his thoughts, and pretty dark they are too. Sure, it's the Juggernaut's fault that she's in the back of that ambulance. He as good as killed her himself, and it didn't mean a thing to him. But Spidey failed her, just like he failed Uncle Ben, Captain Stacy, and Gwen. He thinks they all died because of him, because he screwed up. It's typical of Peter Parker's overriding sense of responsibility that he thinks that just because it was impossible to stop the Juggernaut, that doesn't let him off the hook. Now he blames himself for somebody else's life hanging in the balance, and he's not going to let the Juggernaut get away with it. He is going to find a way to stop the unstoppable, or die trying. What a way to end an issue. And, of course, you'd have to wait 30 days to find out what happened next. Well, not us. When you think of the battle between Spider-Man and the Juggernaut, the bits that you remember most clearly probably aren't from that previous issue. They're from this one. Starting almost straight away, when, as soon as the recap is out of the way, Spider-Man uses his initiative and a girder to try to slow the Juggernaut down. Of course, it doesn't slow him down. In fact, he catches it. More than that, he screws it up. Spidey launched that from high up a nearby building that was in the process of being demolished. He may well be out of arm's reach, but he isn't out of harm's reach. As the Juggernaut, making his way onto the demolition site, tears off one entire corner of the building. As Spidey takes evasive manoeuvres, he thinks to himself, he's going to have to hit Juggernaut with something a lot harder. A lot harder than a girder? Like what? A wrecking ball. Of course. It may well weigh 3 tons, but after Spidey has built up some momentum and launched it in the direction of the Juggernaut, it's going to feel like a lot more than 3 tons. Oh, okay. This is insane. He just swatted it aside, sending it flying into that building. Actually, things are going from bad to worse, because as it passes through the building, it weakens the structure before the entire thing comes crashing down on both combatants. Thanks to his spider sense, Spider-Man manages to avoid the worst of the falling masonry, and as he pulls himself up into the fresh air, he thinks that he almost feels sorry for the Juggernaut. He never had a chance. That is before he discovers that the Juggernaut has already left the scene. Black Tom Cassidy is still bobbing around on his yacht, and as he looks to the city through his binoculars, he sees the Juggernaut passing Chekhov's construction site. He also sees that he's being followed by you-know-who. He really doesn't give up, does he? Even when things get worse. And yes, they are about to get worse. Because he's run out of web fluid in both shooters. Not only that, but when he lands and reaches for a refill, he realises there aren't even any of those left. Not after the amount of webbing he's tried to use on the Juggernaut. He's perched on top of a gasoline truck at this point, something that the truck driver doesn't appreciate. He tries to give Spidey the big un, but Spider-Man, being Spider-Man, deals with him in his own way. Did I say driver of a gasoline truck? Yeah, I think I did. Juggernaut is taking a shortcut through the construction site to get to the dock when he suddenly hears the honking of a horn. He says, "A tanker truck? Who'd be fool enough to come after me with that?" I think we all know the answer to that one, Juggy. Indeed we do, as Spider-Man wedges the accelerator into place and leaps free of the truck as he points it directly at a stubborn Juggernaut. And then we get a great page, beginning with the Juggernaut claiming, "This won't hurt me," a determined "nothing can," and then the result of Spider-Man's latest attempt to stop him. Black Tom is still watching from his yacht, and he can't see any sign of his colleague. The horror of what Spidey has done finally hits him. He says it's like staring into a blast furnace. Juggernaut must have been instantly incinerated. But then we get Terminator vibes. Because yes, it is like staring into a blast furnace. But to the Juggernaut, so what? He emerges from the inferno fully aflame. That won't stop him, but it does irritate him, so he kicks over a fire hydrant to put himself out. He still isn't shouting, but he has had enough of Spider-Man. So now Spider-Man once again has to avoid being pulverised, and he figures the best way to do that is by getting up close to the Juggernaut and trying to rip that helmet off. After all, that could be his weakness. Well, it worked for the Beast, but that was in different circumstances. Juggernaut says he knows what he's playing at and it won't work. Too many people have yanked his helmet off before, so a couple of days ago he got it welded in place. But it isn't the source of his power, is it? Again, Spider-Man is annoying him, so he decides to scrape him off by walking through a building, just like before. Spidey doesn't fancy going through that again though, so he simply covers Juggernaut's eyes. Then the two of them struggle. Spidey struggling to stay on, struggling to keep Juggernaut blindfolded, and the Juggernaut desperately trying to tear the wall crawler off. This struggling continues on until eventually the Juggernaut realises he's finding it hard to move his legs. That is because as he staggered on, he actually waded out into the heart of freshly laid cement foundations. Now Spider-Man is finally able to leap free of his foe, and he sits and watches as the Juggernaut rants against him, saying he smashes cement. But as Spidey points out, not wet cement he doesn't. He is now like a man stuck in quicksand. And the last we see of him is one hand as he sinks from view, still defiantly declaring he's the Juggernaut. He doesn't need air. He can't be stopped. And then as we see the dazed wall crawler, we're reminded that there is still an inferno raging around them. This would look great on the big screen. And then we see that Peter Parker's day really has improved. Because it turns out that when he was looking for those spare web cartridges earlier, he accidentally switched on his automatic belt camera. And he is going to have some great pictures for the Bugle. Later on at the offices of the Daily Bugle, John Romita Jr. uses super widescreen to great effect in his storytelling, as the newly employed Lance Bannon complains about the fact that the police wouldn't let him anywhere near the Juggernaut Spider-Man fight, before Peter Parker emerges from the darkroom and races up to Robbie Robertson, his own exclusive pictures in hand. Lance Bannon is as curious to see the pictures as we are, and he is eaten up with jealousy when he sees just how well they've turned out. And how is Madame Webb? She survived, just about, but her memory didn't, as she seems to have forgotten who Peter is. Still on his yacht in the dock, Black Tom is watching the construction site, waiting for the Juggernaut to emerge from the cement. And he waits, and he waits, and he waits. The next issue saw Spider-Man tangled with the menace of the Cobra. A bit of a come down. As for Juggernaut, he did eventually emerge from that cement. Not that we saw it, but we did see him shortly after. He next appeared in issue 183 of the Uncanny X-Men, trying to unwind after his run-in with Spidey. Not that he got much chance to relax in what is another great issue. If you want to see that in more detail, have a look at part 3 of my Secret Wars review. Link on the screen, naturally. Peter Parker eventually learns via the news that Jugs got free, and they are reunited along with Black Tom Cassidy in issue 150 of Marvel Team Up. And if you are wondering how Spidey could stand a chance against the two of them, don't worry, he has help from a few of the X-Men. And if you are really curious about how they defeat the gruesome twosome, then you can check out a more in-depth look at that issue in the last part of my Complete Marvel Team Up series. Here you go, here's your link. You're welcome. Madame Webb is an interesting one, as after that awesome tale, interest in the character cooled dramatically. She appeared briefly in Amazing Spider-Man 239, still in her hospital bed, and claiming that she had lost not only her memory, but also her psychic abilities. Although there is a heavy hint that she actually does still retain both of those faculties. And then that was it until the late 90s, when she came back in time for the Gathering of Five storyline and to the end of Volume 1 of The Amazing Spider-Man. So is this two-part Spider-Man story worthy of its legendary status? What, with Spider-Man essentially using New York as a giant arsenal in an attempt to stop an unstoppable foe? With John Romita Jr.'s storytelling abilities on full display? And Roger Stern being able to write a story that is essentially one big fight, while still keeping it engaging on a human level? Absolutely.